Hey guys, it's Will here from Lunarch Studios. So, you know all the rules of Prismata, but how do you begin to play? You've seen part 1 of our How to Play series, you know how the game works, and you know all the base set units and what they do. But there's still a lot of decisions that you need to make to manage your economy, tech, attack, and defense at the same time. This video will try to walk you through some of the basic strategies in Prismata. If you're the type who likes to be kept in the dark, and you want to figure out a metagame all by yourself, then spoiler alert, this video might not be for you. But if you want a quick primer so that you can start brawling with your friends immediately, then you should continue watching. In this video, I'm going to give you a lot of rules of thumb. They should all be taken with a grain of salt, and where Prismata really gets interesting is when you need to break these rules. But there'll be a simple foundation of how to play Prismata well, and I'm going to outline some common pitfalls that new players step into. Let's start at the beginning of the game, getting drones. In a real-time strategy game where you command an entire civilization, you always want to bolster your economy at the start. You need a good economy to support your troops. Your basic plan in a game of Prismata should always be to buy drones at the start, keep buying drones until you hit a magic number, and then stop after that. Now, what is the magic number? Well, that's the hard part, but of course it depends on what's available in the random set and what your opponent is doing. To start, I'd say it's safe to always get somewhere between 12 to 15 drones. Make sure you get at least 12. I see a lot of new players not get enough drones. But don't get any more than 15. Resources later in the game are much better spent on attacking or defending units. Oh, and also, don't get the third engineer. Unless you're going for like 18 plus drones, it's not really worth it to speed up your drone production, and it's very risky for a new player to get the third engineer because you can easily get rushed down when you commit that much to early econ. We get to the second part of the game, which is choosing tech. By tech, I mean Conduit, Blastforge, or Animus, the units that give you green, blue, and red and allow you to build military units. The most important thing to know about building tech is you don't want to waste blues and reds, which expire at the end of your turn. To do that, you need to have a reasonable plan in mind of what you might build and have the right drone to tech ratio. For example, if my plan was to build walls and steel splitters off of a blast forge, then I want to have about 5 to 6 drones per blast forge so that I can always spend my blue every turn. If my plan was to build a combination of tarsiers and rhinos off an animus, I probably want to have 9 drones for my animus so that I can build a tarsier and a rhino every turn. You always want to err on the side of having leftover gold instead of an idle blast forge or animus. The gold can be used to buy engineers, which are always a solid defender, while the extra blast forge will just sit there idle. So this turn, for example, it would be a terrible mistake to get a blast forge and an animus if my plan is to just get walls, steel splitters, tarsiers, and rhinos, because next turn I won't have enough drones to spend both of my reds and my blue. It would be much better to say get 2 drones and an animus, or 2 drones and a blast forge. Conduit is a bit different because you can always store up a bunch of green and use them later for force fields or something. So I think going drone conduit blast forge is reasonable here, because even though I don't have enough drones to buy both a Gauss cannon and a steel splitter next turn, I can just buy a steel splitter and store up the green from my conduit for later. Okay, so we have a blast forge and we can start producing military units now. The most important thing to remember is don't get defense until you need it. My opponent has no attackers yet, so if I built a wall, it would just sit there and defend against nothing. If I got a steel splitter, I can start attacking and putting pressure on my opponent. Remember, the defenders in Prismata usually have prompt, which means they can defend right away, so you don't need to get them until the last possible moment. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm only going to build base set units, even though normally Prismata is played with a random set as well. Okay, so it's our opponent's turn, and they have to deal with our steel splitter. A lot of players here I would see just get 2 tarsiers and let us kill an engineer with a steel splitter. But in general, you really want to be getting a rhino here. The rhino has prompt, and it has 2 health, which means when we attack, he can take the 1 damage and heal back to full health right away, essentially absorbing 1 damage. In general, Absorb is the strongest, most busted mechanic in the game, and you want to be taking advantage of it as often as possible. So, like if Wall is in the set, you really don't want to be suffering any casualties on your side until your opponent gets to 3 attack. Him building a Rhino here is like getting a free engineer, because now I don't get to kill an engineer. And I think also getting a Blast Forge here is pretty good, because he has exactly 13 drones, and with a Blast Forge and an Animus, you can get exactly 2 Tarsiers and 1 Wall every single turn, and it's a good combo because the Wall will protect the high damage but low health Tarsiers. Sort of brings up another point I wanted to mention is, originally I talked about how important it is to not waste blues and reds. Well, what if your strategy was just to only get conduits and get Gauss cannons so that you don't have to worry about wasting blues and reds? Well, the problem with the green units is they're fragile, which means damage dealt to them is permanent. They don't have the ability to absorb. So usually you want to get either blue or red, at least in the base set, just because absorption is so powerful, and you want either the Rhino or the Wall to help you absorb damage in the early game. So now it's our turn. There's no point to attack with a Steel Splitter, so we're just going to build up more attackers. And it is sort of at this point where I consider the game to have entered the mid-game phase from the early game. Both sides have an absorber out, and neither side will deal any damage for a while. So both sides, their objective is now to pile up attack, and once your attack reaches that of their biggest absorber, then you're going to start dealing damage. So I'm going to get a Gauss cannon and a Steel Splitter here, and here I actually have 2 leftover gold. I'm not really ever going to need it for anything else, so I might as well buy an engineer. So that was a bit suboptimal, but it's much better than having bought the Blast Forge a turn earlier and wasted a blue, and the engineer will come in handy later for defense. I'm going to play the next couple of turns fairly quickly. Both sides are just building up attackers, and they won't be able to deal any damage until they get to 3 attack, because both sides are going to have a Wall which absorbs for 2. So now I have 3 attack. I'm going to start killing stuff, but I still really need more attackers before I can do any substantial damage. And my opponent still can't destroy anything, but his pile of Tarsiers are getting bigger, which is scary. So yeah, this is fairly mechanical. He loses a Rhino, continues pumping the Tarsiers and Wall as planned. I suffer my first casualty this turn, which is an engineer. And here we actually need to be careful. This yellow sign here warns us that our opponent's attack next turn, which is in square brackets, has reached our defense. This means they're going to kill all our defenders if we pass the turn like this. This is really bad because we don't get the absorption abilities of our Wall. If we build a force field here, we're going to only lose an engineer and a force field, and then put 2 damage on the Wall next turn, essentially only losing 3 health worth of units. If we don't buy the force field, we're going to lose both engineers and the Wall, losing 5 health worth of units. This is why absorption is so powerful. It's like 2 free damage every turn. So now the yellow sign disappears and we're safe for our turn. Our opponent is actually pretty well defended, it seems. So he continues to pump the Tarsiers and the Walls. We defend as we planned. Now, this turn, a red warning sign comes up, because not only does our opponent have enough attack to destroy our defenders, he can get through for 3 damage and destroy our drones, which are very flimsy relative to the Steel Splitters. So this is doubly bad. Not only do we lose the ability to absorb with our Wall, he gets to choose what to kill with his remaining 3 damage and kill our most fragile units, which are the drones. We need to build a Wall and a force field here to rescue ourselves. So this is very, very important. Probably the most important thing in Prismata is you need to not get breached for as long as possible. You need your defense to be greater than their attack for as long as you possibly can and not have these warning signs show up. So I can build a Wall and a force field here and maybe just get engineers for next turn to survive. So our opponent has to watch out now as well, because we have 8 attack and he only has 7 defense. So he can't actually get that Tarsier anymore. He needs to get a Rhino so that now he has 9 defense. So the game is actually going to play out like this for a while. I mean, the moment you get breached is when the game is over. But if both players are careful, they should be able to defend for a while. And this is sort of where I consider the mid game to be over and the late game to start, the end game. Both players are no longer able to build up any more attackers and are scrambling to use all their resources to defend themselves, and it's kind of a race to see who can outlast the other. He loses everything except a wall here. A wall and a rhino is 9 defense, which is enough for the 8 attack. He can actually buy another Tarsier here. So we're sort of scrambling for defense here. We wanna, so I guess one question you could ask is, why don't we use our steel splitters to defend? We could, but that's sort of like a last resort. While we can defend with walls and force fields, we should, because the steel splitters get to attack and deal damage to him. So now he is scrambling too. Okay, so now this is an important point to illustrate, which is he's bought a wall and a rhino, which is the prompt defenders that he can buy, and he still only has 8 defense to my 8 attack. So sort of the next thing to resort to are your drones. Your drones can defend if they don't work, and it's much better to defend with a drone here than to work with a drone and let me kill both walls. If you defend with a drone, he gets to absorb with the last wall and essentially lose the drone instead of a wall. Whereas if he doesn't, I'm going to destroy the rhino and both walls, and probably next turn I'm going to get through to his Tarsiers, which only have 1 health each, and the game is just going to be over. So he needs to start losing drones here. I'm already losing my drones by building force fields, so the game is definitely winding down. We're reaching an end game, and it's basically a race to see who can defend, who can last longer. So here, this is another thing that you can be careful. Here's another thing to take note of, is the yellow sign is here because his potential attack next turn is 11 and my defense is 11, but I expect him to lose the rhino on defense, and his attack potential will actually be 10. So a thing you can try to pay attention to is this number is not always correct. You can look at what you're going to kill, and that number could go down. So, of course, he could be really tricky and lose both walls and save the rhino to breach me as well next turn, but that's a complicated line, and we'll get more to it in the future. But for now, the thing to remember is this number, which is the potential attack of your opponent in square brackets, is not always 100% accurate. I don't think he can afford to lose both walls here, so he'll lose the rhino, and rhino and wall, that's 9. That's enough, so buy an engineer for next turn. We're going to lose everything except the wall, and we're actually in trouble here because we're going to need to resort to using a steel splitter for defense now. Because, I mean, we could also, instead of buying the wall, sort of defend with all our drones and have enough defense, but then the game is just over the next turn. So I'm going to start resorting to a steel splitter and defending with the steel splitter. And it looks like our opponent's actually still holding on pretty well. So I think we just lose this game. I think there's not really much we can do. We can sort of hold on, probably a few more turns by using more steel splitters, but at this point, the steel splitters aren't even attacking. And the thing I'm trying to illustrate is note how long I cannot get breached for, because I know the game is basically over the moment I get breached. So I'm just trying to hold on for as long as I can. But I mean, I think this game is over. We're just crumbling much faster than he is. He's really surviving just by getting a wall and a rhino and an engineer every turn. I think the reason we lost this game is we got steel splitters and Gauss cannons instead of Tarsiers. We were paying more for our attackers, and the fact that they have more health than the Tarsiers and are harder to destroy once we get breached was never relevant because neither side breached and the game was already over. So this sort of brings me to another point. I see a lot of new players automatically prefer Gauss cannons over Tarsiers because they have more health, they're strictly better. But you're paying a large price for the 5 health. And if it's not relevant because you're not going to get breached anyway, then you're much better off getting Tarsiers. And this is often the case in base set only. There really isn't any threat of breaching your opponent, so usually Tarsier is probably the best attacker. Of course, if we were playing with a random set, then everything changes. In this specific random set, there's Scorchilla, which can burst through and deal 3 damage right away, which is very threatening for Tarsiers, combined with Frostbites, which can be used to chill your opponent's defenders, freeze them, and then they can't block. The combination of chill and a burst of attack from Scorchilla are sort of 2 signs from the random set that maybe Tarsiers aren't the best strategy. The presence of defense grid in this set means you can go higher on the number of drones because it's a 7 health defender that can protect your economy, so you could get closer to maybe 15 drones instead of 12 drones. Lastly, I wanted to mention the following mistake that I often see new players make, which is they're familiar with the base set units, so they tend to always buy mostly base set units. But really, we actually balance the game so that the base set units are on average slightly weaker than the random set units, so that every game is different instead of players just getting the base set units every game. So, for example, in this set, we have Shadowfang, which is sort of just an improved version of Tarsier, which also only has 1 health and is a very efficient attacker. In general, you'd want to be getting Shadowfangs instead of Tarsiers, and instead of Gauss Cannons, you'd want to be getting Venge Cannons, which is sort of an improved version with also an attacker with a lot of health, but it's stronger than Gauss Cannon. Alright, let's make a quick summary of what we've learned in this video. In the opening, you want to buy drones and keep buying drones until you hit some magic number. After that, you stop. For starters, 12 to 15 is a safe magic number. You don't want to get the 3rd engineer usually in the beginning. There's no need for that additional rate of drone production. In the early game, you don't want to get an Animus or Blastforge too early and watch your blues and reds decay. You want to be aware of what ratio of drones you need to make full use of your blues and reds every turn. Conduits are more forgiving because green can be stored. Given the choice between getting an attacker and a defender, if your opponent has no attack, there's no need to get a defender to block against nothing. You want to get the attacker first until you need the defender. But if your opponent got the first attacker on the battlefield, then you want to be getting a prompt defender like Wall or Rhino really early to absorb their damage and suffer no casualties in the early game. In the mid-game, both players have their first absorber out and can't hurt each other for a while. Your goal should be to keep buying attackers. But if your opponent would breach you if you don't buy a defender, then you gotta buy a defender. You can use the attack potential in square brackets to check whether you have enough defense, but remember that it can sometimes be wrong, because you would kill one of their defenders, which the attack potential number accounted for as one of their attackers next turn. In the endgame, it's a contest to see who can survive longer without getting breached. Force fields are very useful if you have green. They can help you survive for longer by converting your drones to 2 hit point defenders. Steel splitters and similar units can be put on defense duty. Drones are your last resort, but it's still better to lose drones than to lose your last wall or lose a Tarsier. Of course, all of this needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because depending on what is in the random set, the trajectory of the game can be way different. Here are some strategy selection basics that we talked about. You want to get low health attackers like Tarsiers by default, because they're cheaper and you don't expect your opponent to breach you and kill them anyway. However, if there's burst attackers like Scorchilla in the set, or chilling units like Frostbite in the set, then it's very possible for your opponent to breach early, and you may want to consider getting attackers with higher health instead. If there's a big defender in the set like Defense Grid, then your magic number of drones should be closer to 15 than 12, because the big defender will be there to protect your drones for a long time. Finally, try to focus your strategy around random set units. Even though the base set units are still efficient sometimes, the random set units are, on average, stronger. Alright, that's it guys. But really, this is the beginning. All the rules I just stated can be broken, and that's when Prismata gets really interesting. There's also, in the random sets, there can be attackers that produce tech, there can be drones that are good in the late game, there can be units that make you scream, please breach me. In general, there's an ocean full of possibilities, and I hope you enjoy playing Prismata. Okay, thanks for watching guys. Bye!